Thanks everybody. It's going to be quite an exclusive little crowd, which is great. Feel free to come forward if you want to. We can make it quite interactive, as there's not many of us. I'm Oliver Cronk. I'm the Technology Director at ScotLogic. I lead on a lot of our research and development. That spans actually two main areas, AI, research and development, and also technology sustainability. And actually an opportunity came up last summer to get some UK government grant funding to look at this topic of can we use generative AI to detect greenwashing. So it combined the two areas of research that myself and the team have been doing. So before I get into that, a little bit on who's ScotLogic and a bit of a background to this project. So ScotLogic, you may have seen in the keynotes earlier, my boss Colin up on stage. We're a software and data engineering consultancy. We've been involved in FINOS pretty much from the beginning. And 20 years ago when we started, we were pretty much just doing investment banking, big in financial services, software development projects. Increasingly now we do energy and we do other sectors as well, but financial services is in our DNA. We do a lot of financial services work. And so as part of kind of looking at some of what our clients are looking at, our clients are increasingly looking at things like climate risk and ESG reporting and so on. So we started looking at what areas can we participate in. And so this came about actually from a FinTech Scotland government grant programme, the University of Strathclyde with an academic kind of partner, and then Aberdeen Asset Managers were actually the industry sponsor. So it was really helpful having a real ESG analyst team to work with and kind of bounce our ideas and our prototypes off of. So you'll see some of that in what we're doing. Essentially what this project is I'll move on to the next one actually. ESG analysis. So for those of you who don't know what ESG is, perhaps for the recording, it's environmental, social and governance. It gets a bit of a bad reputation because we've had quite a lot of greenwashing. There's lots of organisations that have claimed that they're doing environmentally friendly things or things that will reduce their impact. And the reality is, unfortunately, a lot of it can just be marketing. So what ESG analyst teams like Aberdeen, the one we were working with, the challenge they have is how do they filter the genuine progress that companies are making from the noise, from the greenwashing. There's lots of misleading claims and how can you potentially detect those? Because the challenge is these environmental reports are getting huge, like multi-megabyte, hundreds of pages in some cases. So it takes a lot of time to process that and kind of analyse it. And the specific use case I'm going to talk you through is actually Aberdeen looking at onboarding a new company into an ESG fund. So doing that due diligence, doing that assessment of whether a company should be allowed to be included in an ESG fund that they're running. But a bit more terminology, because also we managed to get this not only detecting greenwashing, but we also started flagging something called greenhushing. And greenhushing is actually when companies don't talk about the things they are doing, they downplay them so that they avoid scrutiny, or sometimes they might talk about things they are doing well on in order to sort of misdirect from the things they're not doing so well on. The other thing that will come up in my talk is something called materiality. Now, in some cases, that can mean sort of what's financially material, but in this case, this is what's material. What's a material issue for an industry? So clearly, for a beverage manufacturer, someone making drinks, that's going to be water. Water is a significant resource that company will use. But for other industries, other issues are more material, and it's not just about environmental issues. Some of them might be social, some of them might be governance. So with that, in fact, before I move on, can I get a bit of a show of hands? Who comes from more the sort of ESG, who would sort of describe themselves as having a reasonable understanding of ESG in the room, just so I can kind of... So is everyone else a technologist? Is that fair? Or working with technology or managing technologists? Okay, cool. All right, helpful for me to know where to pitch the talk. So to start with, so by the way, I should say, I'm going to give you not many slides, a couple of slides just to kind of set the scene, and then I'm planning to do a demo. I've actually pre-loaded a whole bunch of stuff so that we're not reliant on Wi-Fi working. So don't worry, this isn't death by PowerPoint. I will be showing you this thing in action. But let me just sort of walk you through what it's doing. So the reason that this talk is entitled sort of using AI workflows and agentic AI is we quickly established that we couldn't just let this be a wide open agentic type application. To start with, processing the ESG report needed to go through some quite concrete, deliberate research steps. And so that's why we start with this AI workflow. We go through, we kind of verify the report. One of the most important things is to establish what legal entity we're dealing with. So what we don't want to be doing is conflating companies. We don't want to be like, because one of the things this tool will do is go online and try and verify things through other sources. What we want to absolutely make sure is we have the right company. So that's one of the first things that is verified is the company name, and you'll see that in the demo in a minute. We then work through a bunch of different steps in that report workflow to kind of analyse the statements the company's making. So there's something in the order of sort of 12 to 15 LLM calls in that report analysis process. It takes a couple of minutes. It's just one of the reasons why I've preloaded it, to save us all sort of sitting here waiting. But that could be made more efficient. You've got to bear in mind this was very much a research project, so I'd say this is sort of alpha. It works functionally, but the non-functionals and the performance potentially could be improved. The other thing we're thinking is that this step might be something that gets run perhaps overnight or when something changes. So when there's a new ESG report for a company, that would trigger sort of a batch process rather than this all working in real time. So the demo is more of a sort of demonstrator than probably a real world sort of application of this tech. So yeah, we used the kind of AI workflow where we needed to kind of stay in control. I have a deterministic series of steps that we wanted to kind of go through and then call out, use the language processing capability of various different LLMs, because this isn't just using GPT, by the way. Behind the scenes, it's using Mistral, it's using OpenAI's GPT, but we've abstracted it from the underlying AI model so we can swap in different models, because we found some models were better at certain tasks in this workflow than others. And then it forms the basis of like the further interactive questioning. So this first bit is very much a predetermined workflow, and then we drop into a familiar type interface, ChatGPT, Claude, where you can question and interrogate further. So materiality assessment, I mentioned we're looking at the material issues. And the way we did this, in fact, this is, again, feedback we had from our industry sponsor, was it would be great if you could call out what the material issues are for this company and make sure that they are aligned. Because the problem, if you're an ESG analyst working for a bank, you won't know every single different sector, right? Environmental sustainability is really challenging because it's such a broad topic, not only in terms of the science, but in terms of what is and isn't relevant for each different industry. So this is where we loaded in, we created a set of documents from the likes of GRI, which is like an open set of information that's available on regulatory, on a global sort of sustainability. The TNFD, which is the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosures, TCFD. So there's a bunch of open material, and equally for a client could also load in their own analysis, their own material as well into this repository. But what this is doing is, for those of you that you've probably heard of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, this part is using RAG. So we've got all these documents in a curated data set. We go and look for that industry. So we identify the industry in the report, what industry is the company from. And we then go and look in these expert written documents and look for the material issues. And we then cross-compare the report against what those material issues are. So we then look for coverage gaps or mismatches. And so, yeah, as I say, we're going to get into this flow of we allow the ESG analyst or whoever's using the tool to ask a question. And the way this works is, this is actually built on a bit of research we did previously, something called Infer, this agentic framework that we built just because we wanted to, as a company, understand how to build an agentic framework. We played with things like LangChain, but we weren't particularly impressed by them at the time we were using them. We also wanted more control over the prompting and how the models were being used, so we built our own. And this is the basic flow of how this works. We essentially have this intent agent. What that does is it looks at the question, and it then breaks that down into the intent, the different parts of the question. And then it triggers a supervisor, which will then trigger sub-agents to go and do different parts of that task. We'll then evaluate the responses, and we'll then work out which ones of the agents returning is the best response. So which response are we going to select? Because we might actually get multiple agents in parallel to try and answer the query, and then aggregate those things back together and kind of figure out which response we're going to use. And crucially, and this is one of the reasons we were selected actually for grant funding, is we're very big on traceability and transparency. So anytime you ask a question, there's a button. It's a bit crude at the moment. It's a variable dump of essentially the trace of how we came to that response. What agent did we use? What was the query? What's the citations? Because we do include citations when we've gone online, but you can find all of that. You can kind of trace it. So whilst, of course, we can't go deep into the black box that is the LLM, we can at least capture all the telemetry around the use of the language model and have an audit trail and some degree of repeatability by having that information captured. So hopefully we'll now have a live demo if Wi-Fi plays ball. So yeah, this is Infer. As I said, it's a demonstrator, so it doesn't look super pretty. We didn't really focus so much on the design. We were more about the functionality. And so, so I'll make it a bit bigger so people can see. So when it loads, it makes it very clear what it's here to do. So I'm InferESG. I'm here to help you analyse a company's sustainability messaging and detect potential greenwashing. And to start, you upload a report. And what it calls out quite clearly is that it cannot categorically determine greenwashing. What it does is it looks for evidence or suspicious sort of claims, and it flags things for an analyst to go and assess. I guess one of the things I didn't say in my slides just now is this is very much about trying to achieve the right balance here of using the AI and then using human sort of insight and decisioning and critical thinking to kind of establish whether these things that it's calling out are greenwashing truly are. Because it might just be that there's missing information in the report, or it might just be that the system has gone off the rails. We actually did quite extensive testing with this. We did 3 releases over 3 months, and our accuracy scores were in the sort of 90% range by the end of our 3rd release of development. So it's it's working pretty well. But I have to say that the testing was on a series of specific companies. So we've not done really broad testing, but we've done quite deep testing on the companies that we have run this against. So yeah, and it explains, you can get explanations to the answers by clicking the Show Me How You Did This button. So then what I did earlier was I uploaded the pharmaceutical company. You can probably see the name, but I perhaps won't shout it out. A major pharmaceutical company, and you can then click here to view the report. And essentially what this does is, and this is very much based on what our industry sponsor wanted in terms of the information that came back. The first thing it does is it verifies that this is for AstraZeneca, a company in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry, so that we can make sure that we have got the right company. Because at this point, if the system's got it wrong, then obviously this isn't going to work. The next thing it then does is it breaks down the document into the categories of environmental, social, and governance, inclusive percent. So you can see this has got 60%. It calls out some of the key sort of summary of the points, social, and then governance. And this is largely done on the sort of amount of lines or the amount of pages that are covering those different topics. It also calls out what's not discussed. Now, I won't go through all this because it's quite comprehensive, because if you bear in mind, if you were an ESG analyst doing this work, this could potentially take you days, or if you've got concerns, that might take a couple of weeks to sort of do the due diligence. So there's quite a lot of questions here, and it's the reason why the process takes a while. But essentially, there's a series of questions that we're looking for. So the first thing we're looking for are what are the stated goals? So here you have that it's got greenhouse gas reduction targets, it's got energy efficiency goals, it's got water usage reduction. So here are all the claims, and crucially numbers, because the first time we built this, the first release, came out with just text-based summaries saying, oh yeah, they're doing quite well, or they're making claims. What we actually needed was to pull out percentages, facts, numbers, figures, scientific sort of verifiable stuff. So that's what this version now does. It actually calls out sort of real numbers behind the claims as well, where they're available. Because if they're not available, then that's a sign potentially of greenwashing itself, that the quite vague and unsubstantiated claims are being made in the report. So if we scroll through, there's a whole bunch of other things around its kind of goals that they claim to have achieved. And then we get to the greenwashing section. So for environment. So say we're going to go through environment, social and governance. And don't worry, I'm not going to walk through social and governance. We'll skip over those. But I'll just talk to you about the greenwashing claims for environmental. So the first one that's called out is the stated environmental metrics versus industry standards. It's talking about missing baseline data or calculation methodologies and non-standard or proprietary measurement methods. So those are the first things it's called out. It's then calling out things around the timeline, so there's vague or distant target dates. Because the thing about ESG reporting is it's not just about making claims about what you're going to do. It's really the best reports or the best plans have very concrete plans in terms of timescales, like when are they going to achieve certain reductions or improvements. So just sort of generally ham-wavily saying, oh, we're going to reduce our water usage isn't really good enough. You need to be quite specific about the amount, even in percentage terms or units, and then why what date. So that's why this is quite key. So yeah, so I won't go through all this, but I'm happy to sort of show you this on the booth if you want to sort of see more detail. The next thing we kind of look for is sort of standards, regulations, and certifications. What independent science-backed things are they using? So are they using science-based targets? Are they following the GHG protocol? In this one, you can see it's got reference to TNFD framework. It's got various ISO standards. It's got other things. The reason I've picked this company, by the way, is their report is quite long, quite extensive, and so it gave the system quite a lot to chew on. So that's all that. And then it does the same for social, which looks at diversity and employment and various other things like that. But like I say, I won't kind of go through that line for line, I don't have time. Then it calls out the sort of social washing type issues and does the same for governance. And governance was one of the hardest ones, actually, because there isn't as much written about how the governance mechanism should be in a company. So this was actually not as easy for us to do. And we focused more on the E and the S in this research. And then what I wanted to do was just pull down to where we talk about the materiality. So it's quite a comprehensive report we've generated. So the materiality section I talked about earlier has called out 6 material topics for pharmaceuticals. And first one it's called out is water management. It's saying that that's high relevance to this particular industry. It's saying the document is full in terms of coverage, so they think we think it's doing a pretty good job. And it's then called out a couple of key findings about the fact that they've got clear targets for reducing water by when, and there's commitments to water stewardship and so on and so forth. Next one, biodiversity and ecosystem. This one is saying it's only partial coverage. And the next one, pollution water management, so on and so forth. So what we're doing is not just looking at what the report is claiming. As I say, it's looking at what should be in the report and then going and checking to see if we can find those things. We then have a gap analysis, a whole bunch of other things, essentially a conclusion. Now, what I should say at the moment is there's obviously quite a lot of reading for the analyst. What we'd love to do if we got further research funding or a client project to take this further is to actually start to automate these steps as well. So we've called out a bunch of things. Actually, what would be great is then to go and drill down into those things and do further analysis. At the moment, the next step is to start manually asking questions. But I think what would be amazing is to start clicking on these things and saying, verify that for me further. But you'll see in my next part of the presentation how you can do that essentially yourself by typing in prompts. But yeah, I mean, in summary, with this report, actually, this report's pretty decent in terms of like greenwashing. It's essentially, I think I was reading in here, there isn't an awful lot of signs of claims that are unsubstantiated. So yeah, it's a pretty decent ESG report, this one. So, as I say, once you've done that initial report analysis, which is like that workflow, that sequence of steps that's predetermined, you can then drop into this more agentic sort of workflow. And again, to sort of save waiting, because some of these things can take some time, because there's quite a lot of web searching that goes on, I've preloaded some questions. What I should say is, what the system does as well at the bottom here is it suggests questions. So every time you kind of have a dialogue with it, it will riff off of that topic you've talked about, and it will start suggesting different things you could ask next. But yeah, the first thing I asked it was, can you list any controversies, challenges and concerns? And then it went off and it looked for legal disputes, it looked for different things. And I guess the thing I should say is, zoom back out, sorry, scrolling's not working. Yeah, so it's come back with a summary and it's then come back with references to different places. And this next bit isn't pretty, but like I say, this is the traceability part. So you can see that it had some issues with retrieving some of the responses. But when it did find results, if I just scroll back out again a second, it used the web agent. So we have an agent that scrapes the web, and it goes and finds the answers, and it then produces the citation URLs. So in this instance, we asked it about controversies, and actually it's pretty decent that it went and searched the internet for those, because clearly they're not really going to be in the ESG report of the company. Like, a company isn't going to be like signposting you to where its controversies are in most cases. The next question was then more about greenhouse gas emissions reporting. And I won't walk through what that says, but I'll just sort of look at where that came from. So we've got some references, how it came to that conclusion. This used the file agent. So if you can't see that at the back, that says file agent. And essentially what that's doing is using the original ESG reports to get the answers. So like I say, in this instance, it was probably that the web searches perhaps either didn't work or the scraping failed, because in some cases, this is one of the challenges we found with building the system is, of course, there's lots of anti-bot type technology that tries to stop you scraping. So in some instances, we could see the content was there online, but the system couldn't call it back because the website was detecting it wasn't a human and not allowing for that. So yeah, so we hit some interesting sort of challenges like that. Yeah, so again, sort of a series of bunch of things. But the nice thing is, there's fairly tight summaries here, and then references, and then, yeah, like I say, there's then traceability to see where it came from. And here's another example. So there's a different agent here. The generalist agent is actually a separate large language model we use that if everything else fails to come back with a response, we'll give the generalist agent an attempt to do that. And actually, I have seen in testing, not with this particular report, but with other companies, if we ask it a question it can't answer, I was really excited to see when it came back and went, sorry, I can't answer this question. Because what I wanted this thing to do was not like overconfidently claim it's found things or try and go further than it can really, it can really do. So, yeah. How am I doing for time? I think I'm too bad. So, yeah, I guess the beauty of this is, if any of you have a question, I can fire it in. We'll wait a few moments and it'll come back. So if you've got a question, feel free to shout it out and I can chuck it in and we can come back and see what it comes back with. Equally, if you wanted to run this against a company, come to the booth and I'm happily fire it up against another company and you can see it working in action. I just didn't want everyone to sit here and wait for things to chew through. Great. So the last one I thought was quite interesting. Yeah, so again, the last one was just using, okay, the reason I wanted to talk about this last one, this question at the end I asked it was, can you provide more information on AstraZeneca's biodiversity initiatives and their effectiveness? So it's come back with a whole load of different information here. But what's interesting is it's not just used online, so it's used the web agent here, but it's also used the generalist agent too, and it's then combined the two responses from those two agents to kind of come up with the response. So that sort of shows where, yeah, it's kind of using a couple of different sources to verify against each other to come up with an answer. So with that, that's pretty much my live demo done. I'm happy to jump back to it if someone wants to fire a question at it. And just, yeah, kind of wrap things up, really. So I think the key thing here is that for these analysis tasks at the moment, I think the state of the art is that this is all about augmenting people. It's not about, I don't think it's about replacing. And I think in general, I would say there's quite a lot of excitement. Well, excitement, a strong phrase. I think there's too much hype around this technology's ability to replace people. I think this is an amazing set of tools and capabilities, but in a lot of cases, this is about superpowering people or turbocharging them, letting them sort of sift through the noise. Because this is a great example of someone's job where there is so much information out there, there is so much noise, how do you find the signal? So I think this is a great example of using the right way. This can really sort of help someone really find the things they should be tuning into. So it's a great way of augmenting people. And so, yeah, the key thing here as well is not just over-relying on large language models. Yes, they're cool and everyone's talking about them, but actually we were using knowledge graphs in this platform, we were using traditional databases, we were using RAG, other vector databases and online searching. So, we wanted to use a kind of composite aggregated solution here because large language models are great for language, but they're not necessarily always the right answer for everything. So getting the right balance of people and tech and then what tech that you're using, not just sort of over-relying on fully autonomous agents or scraping or whatever it is. I think it's getting that architecture balance right. It took us quite a lot. I mean, what I've not talked to you about is the predecessor project too much. The predecessor project took us a good 9 months to create a good architecture that would figure out what someone's asking for, split out the jobs into different agents, and then evaluate the responses. That took us quite a long time to build that. The 3 months building the ESG version on top was more tailoring it to like the ESG use case and building the materiality piece. So, it takes work, I think, to get these things right. Transparency and human oversight is really, really critical, particularly in this space where there's lots of kind of claims and counterclaims. You need to better kind of drill down and go and see where the facts are. Where did that source of information come from? Why are you claiming that statistic? Where is the source information? And then finally, the reason I'm here talking about this is it's fairly in line with the OS Climate track, but actually this is an open source project. So all of this thing, including the materiality information as well, where it's open and freely available, is in the GitHub repository. So anyone can go and see this. You can go and see the prompts, go and see the Python. So it's Python based. And I'd love for us to collaborate on it further. We're already having some conversations with clients about taking it further. So some organizations are looking at this and going, this is great, but I actually want to turn this on myself. I want to look at my sustainability report, and I want to see how my subsidiary companies are reporting, and I want to make sure my subsidiaries are aligned with the parent company's reporting. So that's a conversation we're having with one organization. Another organization wants to use it to help look at their supply chain. So in their procurement, like they've got quite strict targets in reducing the scope 3 emissions, the emissions from purchased goods and services. How they can do that is potentially by putting pressure on their suppliers and look at their suppliers' claims and verify their suppliers' claims. So this is something that they're looking at using to kind of look at their supply chain. But I think there are a bunch of different angles. And I'm still toying with the idea of maybe running this sort of on an overnight basis on perhaps the latest company that's appeared in the headlines for greenwashing. Why don't we run their latest report through and see what else they're claiming? So there's potentially some other things we might do with this. But equally, as an architecture for using an AI workflow and then agents, I think that's interesting. But also, this maybe in some cases some of our clients have been quite interested to see what prompts we've been using. So you're welcome to go and check out the GitHub repo. It's fairly mature. It's on here. And if you want to connect with me and talk, I'm going to be on the booth at 5:15. So come find me on the Scott Logic booth or just grab me. But with that's be done. Does anyone have any questions?
So a quick one.
Do you want to wait for the microphone? Sorry.
So first of all, thank you for giving the insight. A quick one is on the intent agent, right?
Sure.
Which you mentioned is the first point of entry.
Yeah.
So I have two questions on it. First, what is the success rate of the intent agent?
Yeah.
And the second question is, what if it does something wrong? So I don't want to sound critic, but just
no, it took a long time to get intent agent working. That's probably what took the original team that worked on the Infer framework a good probably 3 to 4 months of their efforts, where multiple people trying to refine that. It's fairly obvious when it gets it wrong because the responses that come back are completely irrelevant. So when it's got it wrong. But luckily the system is more mature than that in most cases. So, worst case you would see completely irrelevant responses to your ask. Or what you might see is, if you ask quite a complex question, and we can go back perhaps to the screenshot where I asked a really quite complex multi-part question, sometimes perhaps it won't separate out all the different steps it needs to take. It might try and merge things. So getting the balance right of creating an efficient sort of LLM call, which might be just chuck everything, an agent, versus actually breaking out one part and going, right, web search agent for that part, file agent for that part. That's the bit that's taken time. The evaluation is done by another LLM. So we have an evaluator that assesses the intent, whether the intent agent sort of, broken that down. So that's what that supervisor agent does. It then looks at what the intent agent has done and then figures out, right, does that look like a reasonable breakdown to subtasks, and then fires those subtasks off to the sub-workers. So we get sort of things running in parallel. So we have multiple agents running at the same time, which sort of speeds up the execution flow. And then at the end, we get an evaluator that evaluates the responses back and chooses which of those to kind of present back. So the environmentalist in me, though, however, knows that each LLM call has an impact. So the elephant in the room with this project is it is using an awful lot of quite expensive, computationally expensive LLM calls. And so that's why it's really alpha, because it needs further refining and further efficiency. And I think we tried to get the balance right of using deterministic technology that's more computationally efficient versus large language model calls. And that's why we started to introduce more databases and the knowledge graph technology behind the scenes as well.
Thank you. I also have two questions. The first one was my own experience with RAG in internal tools we've got, and also with Gemini, is that often the overview is something that just doesn't exist. So I saw that in the Q&A bit, you can see how it came to that solution, but can you see that in the report? How can you guarantee it's not making things up?
What in the first step, the report analysis? Yeah. So what we did was we did an awful lot of testing, people going and verifying, and also using Claude and other AI tools as well to compare. So we took 3 companies, 3 different industries, different types of company, and did really quite exhaustive testing on that. And the results were encouraging. Now, I'm not going to stand here and claim that it's foolproof and that if you chucked a different company at it, it may not work. But so far, pretty much every company we've thrown at in exploratory testing, it doesn't make major problems. In fact, what it tends to do is go, I can't find something when actually something is available, because we've designed it sort of err on the side of caution rather than overfitting, sort of be more, kind of optimistic about the quality of the report rather than be pessimistic. But in effect, most of the time we stay fairly neutral. We don't want to make sort of claims. We don't have to show taking a side, but we try not to sort of be bold and overconfident. So that's why I was really excited when we got things back like, no, sorry, can't answer this because I don't have the right information. Yeah.
Sorry, follow-up question, if that's okay. Do you not think like a UX solution where you have references to parts of the actual ESG report by the company, or say another agent verifying it? Is that something you would want to explore, have explored?
I think this is just the scratching the surface, really, right? This sort of demonstrates the back-end capability, but I think actually what would be amazing is to personalize this for an ESG analyst. So have an ESG analyst say how they want to work, and then, you know, because actually you could almost, what we didn't quite get to do was the bit that would generate charts or graphs and comparisons to its company peers, things like that. What we'd love to see is, rather than that canvas on the left just be text, it could be charts, it could be code. So you could have, you know, something essentially built on the fly that helps you work the way you want to work as an ESG analyst. So yeah, I think we're only really scratching the surface. I think the frustration for me is the chat bot is a double-edged sword. It's very accessible in that everyone can play with it and see it. Like your CEO can go, oh, this is amazing, I'm now talking to technology. But equally, that's somewhat limiting in terms of not everything has to be a chat interaction. So yeah, 100%. And that's partly why we think some of this should be scheduled. So some of this should almost just be running all the time in the background, and then alerts should ping to the analyst's sort of, you know, notification tray or something to say, hey, we've done some, you know, we've detected something. The other part of this we didn't quite get the chance to do was look at news feeds and analyze news feeds. That was another part of the work which we would like to explore in the future if possible, because then that would ultimately trigger, like, rather than just react to like processing a report, have something that suggests that you should go and check a company. So yeah, that kind of push-pull approach. But yeah, I think there's the opportunities here are endless. But yeah, unfortunately, we only had 3 months. Do you want to?
Thank you. Hi. Thanks a lot for the talk. Can you tell us a bit more about the cross-checking? And I'm just thinking about how do we actually like fact-check this? Mm-hmm. Is there any more weight placed on perhaps like environmentalist groups or like analyst insights to check this information against? Because I imagine there's also dealing with either fake news or bias reporting or ESGs from the same company claims. Yep. So how do you deal with that?
It's a really good point, and I guess I probably should have been clearer that we were just looking for something that evidenced, right? Mm-hmm. We weren't then going and checking whether the tree planting, whatever, had actually happened. That's like a step beyond what we were doing. But I think you're right. I think the thing we did do, though, and the step to use the Task Force for Nature disclosures and other things was, actually our industry sponsor was like, we don't want you just listening to us in terms of what we're looking for in terms of ESG. We want you to go and look at what the environmental groups are saying and the others are saying. And so I think to make that better, you would probably want to load more materials from those sort of access groups and other groups into that curated library. The other thing we've started to do, but again we need to build it out, is this knowledge graph that looks at the legal entity and the sort of supply chain and various things like that, so that we can check and verify certain claims and attributes. So again, we just started on that journey, and if you want to go put this in production, there's more you would want to do to be more sure that there is robust sort of fact checking. Mm-hmm. What we were testing for is, if we say the report said this, and it's this percentage or this time frame or this number, did the system get that right or did it hallucinate it? And so that's what we were doing a lot of accuracy checking against, was just making sure that was true. Or if we then pulled in an online source, a web scrape source, did we process that? Did it process it correctly, or did it start to sort of scramble it and get it wrong? And so our accuracy checking is more, given the information the system has available to it, did it process it and flag things appropriately, rather than, you know, are the environmental claims really true or not? Mm-hmm. But that's a really, really good point. Out of time? Okay, thanks very much. No, done, sorry. Have to take it offline, sorry about that. Okay, thanks very much.